Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series in which we give Precon decks a glow up without breaking the bank. My name's Grazzet, and today we'll be giving the Duskmourn Miracle Worker Precon $35 worth of upgrades to bring it up to Cut Rate standards. As usual though, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content. Consider supporting the channel directly either via my Buy Me a Coffee or my Game Nerds affiliate links in the description if you really like it, and stick around until the end of the video to see what Precon we'll be covering next. Also, if you'd like to see me and my editor's thoughts on the base Precon before any upgrades, you can do so by checking out our first impressions of it also in the description. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. This deck's face commander is Aminatou Veil Piercer, a 2/4 human wizard that costs 1 an Esper that has the following abilities. Firstly, at the beginning of our upkeep, we surveil 2. And secondly, each enchantment card in our hand has Miracle, its miracle cost being its mana cost reduced by 4. Breaking down her core stats, Aminatou is sporting a mid-weight CMC, a low-power average toughness stat block for her cost, and a pair of abilities that combine to enable us to both set up and cast enchantments from our top deck at a sizable discount. So, as a quick refresher before we go any further, a card with Miracle allows us to cast it for its miracle cost if it's the first card we have drawn that turn, meaning Aminatou's second ability, at surface level, enables us to cast any enchantment we draw into on our draw step at a -4 discount. And while this is certainly impressive on its own, allowing us to drop the numerous high CMC enchantments included in this Precon well ahead of curve, the benefits don't just end there, as the keen-eyed among you may have noticed that Miracle can proc on every turn, meaning if we're able to engineer ways to draw cards on our opponent's turns, and we just so happen to hit an enchantment on that first draw, we'll not only be able to cast it at a discount, but also ignore timing restrictions when we do so, which goes a long way to speed up the usually sluggish nature of enchantments by both limiting their ability to be responded to, and by letting us use them to disrupt our opponents at flash speed. But do keep in mind that these impressive benefits come with the caveat that we need to be able to reliably draw enchantments as our first draw each turn, as otherwise Miracle does absolutely nothing. Thankfully though, Aminatou has us covered on that front as well with her passive Surveil 2 on our upkeep, which allows us to stack the deck in our favor and, if we so choose, also set up our bin with enchantments and or creatures for us to recur or reanimate. And when combined with the base deck's decent suite of other top deck manipulation sources, not only do we maximize our odds of hitting big enchantments for us to miracle out, but we also improve the build's overall consistency by letting us dig for enchantment payoffs for added value, or even just lands to ensure we can reliably make our land drops in the early game. So, in an effort to maximize the value Aminatou can generate for us via her top deck manipulation and a cheap miracle casting of our enchantments, it should come as no surprise that our top priority in this upgrade will be to overhaul this deck's enchantment selection, which honestly is already pretty impressive out of the gate, but we'll be augmenting even more with entries that can either take over the game with their powerful effects, help generate us even more value so we don't run out of resources, and even net us extra copies of our most powerful enchantments so we can get double the mileage out of their powerful effects. And then to further support our enchantment-heavy playstyle, we'll be building upon the base build suite of enchantment payoffs with even more entries that will either supplement the base deck's low creature count with additional token creation, generate us card advantage as we get our enchantments into play so we can follow up our miracled spells with even more spells from our hand, or even allow us to recur/reanimate our enchantments from our bin to make them even harder to get rid of, thereby providing Aminatou with all the divine intervention she'll need to call down miracle after miracle onto our opponents. So let us planeswalk to the plane of Ravnica, where the greatest minds across the multiverse have gathered to provide support to the rescue team on Duskmourn, which of course includes the fate-manipulating former planeswalker Aminatou, who had foreseen that she would be needed here. In fact, it was thanks to her ability to alter fate that the rescue team had survived the horrors of the house so far, turning what would have been grisly demises into close calls or missed opportunities into almost overlooked lucky breaks. and even using her magics alongside Profts and Niv-Mizzets to create an artificial omen path into the otherwise inescapable house, giving the rescue team and Nashi even a chance of escaping its clutches. However, even her powers have limits, and the longer the rescue team remains within the walls of the house, the more the possible horrific fates she has foreseen for them become set in stone, until they become a fixed point that even she cannot alter. Still, if there is even a chance for their survival, Aminatou will keep plucking at the strings of destiny until she finds a way to bring her friends home safe. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and her playstyle, let's jump straight into the upgrades. So, considering that this is an Esper Enchantress deck, it should come as no surprise that we'll be kicking off our upgrades by refining the base build's enchantments, which, to its credit, it has a respectable number of high-quality entries already, but we'll be beefing up considerably to make full use out of Aminatou's ability to get our enchantments into play at a discount. Starting off with some enchantments designed to pad our core stats while staying on theme. On the value side of things, we'll be scrapping Burnished Heart, which is an okay but generally too slow and off-theme piece of ramp to get the most usage here, to make space for Inquisitive Glimmer, which is a much better fit as a cost reducer for our enchantments that is also an enchantment itself to help proc all our payoffs. Letting go of Phenomenon Investigators, whose on-death enchantment token creation and self-bound space draw are either too unreliable or too awkward to use in this build, so we can add in Greed, which provides much more straightforward card advantage, and one that we can use to draw cards on our opponent's turn so we can miracle out our enchantments outside of our own draw steps. Trading out Nightmare Shepherd, who is a decent-sized evasive enchantment body, but whose death-dependent ability is a bit lackluster here, considering how few creatures will be running, so we can trade in Overlord of the Flood Pits, who is also a big evasive enchantment body, but now provides us with repeatable draw and graveyard setup for us to take advantage of, which is much more generically useful for our purposes. And, as our last value piece of core stat improvement, we'll be cutting Prognostic Sphinx, whose on-attack scry is serviceable at setting up our top deck for Aminatou, but loses out to the more on-theme Shadow of the Second Sun, which we can cast at a discount off of Aminatou, still provides top deck manipulation alongside her by giving us another on-upkeep Surveil before our turn ends, and lets us untap all our lands and draws us a card on top of that for even more card advantage and ramp for us to take advantage of. And then to close out our new core stat padding enchantments with some additions more geared towards disruption, we'll be removing the bit too expensive removal piece Utter End, so we can add in the more annoying removal aura Imprisoned in the Moon, which we can cast for as little as 1 mana and can be utterly infuriating for our opponents if we use it to reduce their commander to a colorless land, shelving the again too expensive back row removal piece Return to Dust to make space for the multi-targeting O-Ring Grasp of Fate, which can deal with the biggest threats on each of our opponent's boards and is great for making enchantment copies for even more disruption, more on that later, replacing the token creating Miracle Entreat the Angels, which would find a much better home in a more traditional Miracle style deck rather than this one, with Elspeth Conquers Death, which provides solid disruption via its permanent exiling, while also providing additional upside via its spell taxing to slow down our opponents, and its creature/planeswalker reanimation to make even better use out of our commander's graveyard setup. And lastly, releasing Dream Eater, which is a bit too mana intensive and off theme for the top deck manipulation and bounce based removal it brings to the table, so we can make space for Cacophony Unleashed, which functions as a mostly one-sided wipe for us that lets us keep all our enchantment creatures and then sticks around as a 6/6 Death Toucher that has to be double blocked to keep piling on the damage, which is good enough on its own and particularly devastating if we can miracle it out on our opponent's turns. Now, moving on to a series of high-cost, high-power enchantments we'll be adding in to take over the game with their powerful effects, we'll be cutting Arvanox the Mind Flail, whose spell theft still requires us to spend mana to cast said spells, making it less than ideal when we can spend our mana better elsewhere, in favor of Mind's Dilation, which instead lets us cast spells for free off our opponents as they cast their spells, netting us much more value and freeing up our mana to cast our own spells. Terminating Metamorphosis Fanatic, as our low creature count makes its reanimation less good here than in other more dedicated reanimator decks, so we can instead put in Debtor's Knell, which gives us the option to reanimate our or our opponent's creatures each turn, giving us a much wider selection of reanimation targets to choose from and being able to reanimate them more frequently to build up our board with. Smelting Down Brainstone, which can be a solid piece of top deck manipulation to help unload high CMC enchantments we happen to draw into, but is generally too slow in doing so to warrant its inclusion here, so we'll instead be running Curse of Unbinding, which lets us steal even more creatures off our opponents, this time from their deck each turn to further build up our deck's low creature count with unwilling conscripts from them turn after turn, and to wrap up our high CMC enchantment additions, we'll be cancelling our life insurance, since it's both a too death dependent piece of ramp and too much of a mana sink through its extort to be much good in this build, so we can instead build the new room, Mirror Room, and Fractured Realm, which to be honest will mainly be running for Fractured Realm, as it doubles all our permanence triggered abilities, including all the high CMC entrants we just went over and the powerful ones that already come with the deck. But honestly, Mirror Room isn't too shabby itself, particularly since we can hold it in reserve until we cheat out a big enchantment creature or steal a particularly powerful creature off of an opponent so we can double up on it. Then switching gears onto some new enchantment additions that are more focused around taking advantage of our other enchantments in some way, shape, or form for added value. We'll first be raising the mediocre bounce land Orzhov Basilica, scrapping the outdated Mana Rock Commander's Fear, and shelving the much too expensive draw/value piece Aminatou's Augury to make room for the enchantment clone effects, Copy Enchantment, Estrid's Evocation, and Court of Vantress, all of which let us double up on our most powerful enchantments to get twice the usage out of their effects, with the second also allowing us to flicker it each turn to both switch its targets and reproc all our Constellation and Eerie triggers, and the third also giving us the option to switch the targeted copies each turn, letting us copy artifacts if we need to, and if we can hold on to the Monarch it grants us for a full rotation, functionally becomes a second copy of Extravagant Replication for our enchantments to get even more token copies of them into play. And then to close out our enchantment-based enchantment payoffs, we'll be substituting the enchantment recurring Auramancer with the better enchantment recurring Heliod the Radiant Dawn, who still lets us return enchantments from our bin back to hand on ETB like his predecessor, but also cheaply transforms into not only a source of flash speed casting, but also another cost reducer that will make all our spells one or more cheaper as our opponents draw cards to help take the edge off any high CMC enchantments that end up in our hands, and replacing the somewhat gimmicky enchantment reanimating Spirit Sister's Call with the much more straightforward and powerful enchantment reanimating Starfield of Nyx, whose price point is generally much higher than I would normally recommend for a budget upgrade, but who brings so much to the table with its passive enchantment reanimation and ability to turn all our high CMC enchantments into gigantic beatsticks that it's worth making some adjustments to our upgrade so we can accommodate it. Now staying on the Enchantments Matter game plan, but moving on to entries that are not themselves enchantments, we'll open by cutting the lackluster board wipe Time Wipe and the mediocre draw spell Thirst for Meaning, so we can add in the token generators, Ghostly Dancers, and Archon of Sun's Grace, both of which generate us extra evasive board presence as our enchantments ETB to build up our board with the added benefit of either recurring enchantment/opening rooms or padding our life totals respectively, and closing by sidelining the two generic draw source Read the Bones and the off-theme value piece Solemn Simulacrum, so we can slot in the card advantage generating Entity Tracker and Invasion of Theros. The former just passively drawing us cards as we get enchantments into play and open rooms for some no-frills on-theme resource gain, and the latter initially starting off as a tutor that can hit a variety of powerful enchantments for us, and later, when one of our many evasive creatures take down its relatively fragile battle side, becomes another incredibly resilient pseudo-constellation draw payoff on a body to help keep our hand nice and topped off while she screens attacks for us and gains us life. So, having well and truly covered all the new enchantment-focused additions to the build, let's switch gears for a moment to a bit of new top deck support to help us unbrick ourselves if we find ourselves hard drawing into too many high CMC enchantments, which will see us cut a basic swamp from the build, bringing us down to 35 lands, a number which I usually find too low for most builds, but here, thanks to the various pieces of top deck manipulation the core build already has at its disposal to smooth out our draws, is much more palatable, and adding in the Walker Aminatou the Fate Shifter in its place, whose +1 lets us exchange any card from our hand with our top deck to easily enable our commander's miracle casting turn after turn, while her -1 blink effect provides solid utility via its ability to reproc all our Constellation and Eerie triggers as we blink our enchantments, or by letting us quote-unquote reset our auras and enchantment clone effects so they can affect other targets as needed. Then closing in on the end of our upgrades, we'll be making a minor change to our ramp package by slotting out the 2-time top deck manipulator Otherworldly Gaze and the top deck land playing Verge Rangers, which are both okay but not exactly needed anymore with the extra enchantment additions and proper draw sources we've added to the build, so we'll instead be replacing them with the Mana Rocks, Talisman of Progress, and Talisman of Dominance, which give the build more access to both cheap mana acceleration and colored pips, so we can more easily miracle out multi-pip spells off the top, or hardcast high CMC spells from our hand as needed. And finally, we'll be using what little remains of our budget to speed up our land base, which at base contains a glacial 15 tapped lands, in an effort to quicken it up as much as we can so our mana production doesn't lag behind our opponents, in which we'll be terraforming Dimir Aqueduct, Azorius Chancery, Thriving Heath, Thriving Isle, and Thriving Moor, into the faster Sunken Hollow, Prairie Stream, Skycloud Expanse, Glacial Fortress, and Exotic Orchard, all of which either usually or always come into play untapped while giving us access to most of our colors to keep up our consistency without sacrificing speed, and lastly, reshaping the basic land cycling land Ash Barrens into the Esper cycling slow fetch Contaminated Landscape, which we can always use as an untapped colorless land if we need the generic mana. We can crack to fetch any of our basics to give us access to colored pips, and we can even cycle from our hand on our opponent's turns to trigger a miracle if the opportunity presents itself. So, now that we've covered all 30 cards which we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 39 cards that are considered enchantments, 29 cards that care about enchantments, and 24 CMC 5+ enchantments, giving us a critical mass of enchantments and enchantment payoffs to fuel our Enchantress game plan, a good number of which can get the maximum usage out of our commander's miracle casting so we can cast them for as little as 1 to 2 colored pips for the back-breaking effects they bring to the table, and 12 cards that allow us to manipulate our top deck, allowing us to stack the deck in our favor to more reliably miracle our enchantments in the mid to late game, or simply make our land drops and hit our ramp pieces in the early game for added consistency. For general deck stats, we have 15 ramp sources, 11 card draw sources, 10 targeted removal sources, and 3 board wipes, with our ramp being ever so slightly higher than average so that we can still get our high CMC enchantments into play by hard casting them from our hand if we have to. Looking at our mana curve, we have an average CMC of 4.23, which on paper is quite high, but do keep in mind that this includes rooms, which brings up the average since both sides combined are considered their mana value, and when considering our commander and deck's ability to cast most of our CMC 5+ enchantments for as little as 1 to 2 mana, makes this mana curve a lot more manageable than it may initially appear. The final price of this build then comes out to be $75.29 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. Now, before we move on to my additional upgrade suggestions proper, I would just like to briefly mention Zur Eternal Schemer, who would have been a fantastic addition to this build thanks to his ability to animate our non-creature enchantments into massive beatsticks, and empower all our enchantment creatures with powerful keywords and targeting protection, but whose price has spiked since last week from around $1 to around $12 for the cheapest printing due to this deck. But if you were lucky enough to get a copy before his price skyrocketed, I would recommend swapping him in by swapping out Aminatou the Fate Shifter to enable our enchantments just a bit more. Now, if we want to further upgrade this deck by going over budget, we can replace Cacophony Unleashed with Greater Auramancy to increase the resilience of the majority of our playmakers by granting them passive targeting protection. Ink Shield can be traded out for Hallowed Haunting to give us another enchantment-based token generator. This time that creates bodies whose stats scale over time, and that eventually will grant all our creatures evasion and vigilance for an extra power boost. Curse of Unbinding can be exchanged out for Omniscience to give us the ability to dump all our spells in our hand into play instantly for an insane torrent of value. And if we want the ability to precisely control our top deck no matter the cost, we can remove Telling Time, Diabolic Vision, and Invasion of Theros, so we can add in the pricey top deck manipulators Enlightened Tutor, Scroll Rack, and Sensei's Divining Top, all of which allow us to set up our top deck with exactly the cards we need from either our deck or our hand, though you won't really need these cards' power of foresight to see the dead in your future if you decide to run them. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. So, with the Miracle Worker Precon upgrade complete, the next Precon upgrade we'll be tackling will be the Group Slug-focused Endless Punishment Precon and its face commander, Valgavoth Harrower of Souls, so look forward to that build coming soon. That said, while you wait for the rest of the Precon upgrades, you'll have the opportunity to vote for which one of the Precon alternate commanders you want to see get a build of their very own. Those being the Flashbead casting Kian Corrupted Memory, the enchantment reanimating the Master of Keys, the burn inflicting the Lord of Pain, and a multi-type card payoff Rendmaw Creaking Nest. So be sure to cast your votes, link in the description, before the deadline on October 11th, and let me know in the comments which commander you voted for, and which other commanders from this set you'd like to see me feature in future polls. And again, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this content to help keep this channel growing. Consider donating to my Buy Me a Coffee or using my Game Nerds affiliate link in the description if you want to support the channel directly. And if you want to see more videos like this one, either click on the videos floating around my head for the latest builds, or click on the card above for a playlist of all the videos I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.